Okay, so I'm going to go back to moving text around. We set up these columns, and so there's a couple different ways to use columns as far as text goes, so moving text through your columns. I could reduce the size of my text box so that it fits in just that first column. And you can kind of see as I'm moving across there, it's snapping to the column guides. Again, InDesign really wants to help you use the structure that you've set up for yourself. But what happened when I reduced that text box is that I came up with a little red plus mark down at the right-hand corner here. And that's just telling you that there's more text in your text box than you can actually see. So what you want to do is you want to click on that red plus mark, and then click in your next column, and you can see that it automatically flows in that text that you couldn't see in the text box. And because I had a text box that was filling this whole space, I have even more to go here. You can see because I have that red plus mark. Again, so I can flow that into the next column over. The great thing about that then is that all three columns are linked together. So as I reduce the size of this, that text changes. As I reduce the size of this, that text, so it's constantly flowing together and kind of working as a whole system. And you can keep taking that red plus mark and going to pages beyond, you can go to frames beyond. It really allows you a lot of options. But what if you didn't want to have 3 different text frames on one page? I mean, it is kind of a lot of objects floating around. As you're clicking in there, you're probably picking up a lot of different objects. So what you can do to kind of streamline your work is you can create columns within a single text box. What you want to do is you want to bring up your Object Text Frame Options dialog. The shortcut for this one, which is a good one to know as well, is Command V, and it brings up the Text Frame Options dialog. So then you can change the number of columns. I'm going to increase it to 3 just to kind of follow the guides that I have set up. And then I'm going to make sure the gutter, or that space between columns, is following the same gutters that I have already kind of set up in my background. So the great thing about that then is I have one text box. It's working together. You know, if I change the bottom edge of it, all of the bottom edges are lining up together. So it's all kind of working together as one system. Something else that's kind of cool about the single frame is that you can actually take certain portions of the text and make them span the whole frame instead of following that column that's already set up. So say I want to take this first paragraph and make that maybe like a little bit bigger, like some introduction text, and have it span the 3 columns across the top. I simply select it, and then up in this dialog here, you can see the little span columns option. I'm going to go to span all, and automatically that text kind of pops over and crosses the boundaries of all the columns. So it doesn't affect all the type that you have in there, but it does allow you to give it kind of an introductory look. Okay, so the other thing that I was talking about that InDesign is really awesome with is giving you the ability to change spacing between letters, between paragraphs, etc. So the 2 palettes that you're always going to be using in terms of setting type or controlling your type is your character palette here, and then your paragraph palette here. And in your character palette, you have your basic things like changing the font, changing the size of the font. You can stretch your letters, which I would never recommend. Or you could put extra spaces in between all your letters to space them out across a line. So those are the types of things you would do in your character palette. But in the paragraph palette, you have a lot of functionality as far as affecting your text throughout your document. So I'm going to go ahead and select all within my text frame. And a couple of things you could do. You could increase the indent to the left across your entire document. Same thing with the right, you can increase the indent. Across the top you have your kind of general alignment options that you would see in pretty much any word processing program. But these 2 functions right here at the top of the bottom half of this palette are the space before and space after keys. And these are really, really important. So, you know, a lot of times when you're in, say, like a word processing program and you force in a space in between paragraphs, so you hit return twice, you don't have to do that in InDesign. You can go ahead and increase the space after the paragraph, and you can see that it automatically recognizes that where you hit return to start a new paragraph, you want to give it a little bit of comfortable space in between the paragraphs. Another thing that you can do in your in your paragraph palette is you can increase the indent at the beginning of each paragraph, if that's something that you want to do. So a lot of functionality within your paragraph palette. So one way to streamline your work is to set up styles so that you can keep your text consistent. In our office, we have really consistent styles so that whether you're on an agenda or you're working in a proposal or whatever, all of our headers look the same. All of our subheaders look the same. All of our text looks the same. So that we're constantly working in really consistent formats. Erin's actually going to do a little mini session across the hall about character and paragraph styles. So that'll help you see how you can actually streamline setting up your type styles. So I think that's it for text right now until we go across the hall. Now I'm going to move into images. So I'm going to move down this text box and pretend like I want to add in maybe like a header at the top of this page. The best way to bring in an image into InDesign is by placing it. I know InDesign is very friendly to dragging images off from different places, but it's not recommended. And the reason is, I mentioned this before, but InDesign is all about referencing elsewhere. So it's going to be looking for where that link actually came from. If you have a web page open and you drag an image onto there, it's going to have a hard time finding where that image is on your computer. So by placing an image into your document, you're almost forcing yourself to give it a location that it's looking for that image for. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to File and down to Place. And this is another shortcut that I like to use, which is Control-D to place in an image. Because if you're constantly placing in objects, whether it's text or images, it's always helpful to use that shortcut. I'm going to go ahead and just find an image to bring in here.
Even when you drag from the folder that's open, it still doesn't place it.
It'll link it. It'll link it. But I'm saying to... not from a web page.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just a good habit to get into placing it because then you actually have to have a location for it. A lot of people just drag from wherever they're working at that time and it gives you a good location. And the other thing is that you can always go back and gather all of the images that you've brought in together into a package if you're, like, say, handing off the file to somebody else. And Kathy's actually going to run through that across the hall, how to package up your document so that the fonts and the images always travel along with it. Okay, so I have this image in here, and one of the things to keep in mind with images in InDesign is that there's two parts to an image. There's always the frame and then the content, and they work kind of separately from each other. And it can get a little bit cumbersome as you're working in there as to like what you're actually selecting and moving around with. So your frame is your blue outline, and it's kind of easy to remember because you have the frame with the text, it's the blue outline. You have the frame with the image. With the image, you have the frame, so I can reduce the size of it. I can show or hide any portion of the image with that frame. But then the contents, which is the image that's actually placed within that frame, work really separately from the frame. They're kind of like two separate objects. So you can see as I move the contents out of the frame, I still have that limit that I set up with the frame, but the contents are now kind of hidden outside of where the frame is. So just remember that if you click once on the image, you're carrying the whole frame. If you double click on the image and that little hand comes up, that's the contents of the frame. So they're always kind of working separately from each other. You can scale, you can rotate, you can do any of those things to either the frame or the content, but to do them both at once, you have to hold down Shift and Command at the same time. And then you can be controlling them at the same exact time. Moving around. Another really quick kind of trick with imagery is to make the contents fit to the frame that you've created. So instead of trying to kind of scale up your object and find the limits of that frame, you can just go up to Object, down to Fitting, and then you can say Fit Content Proportionally. And you can see that image tries to find the limits, but it keeps its proportions of the image, which is always really important. You don't want to end up stretching something vertically or horizontally because it'll just make it look bad. So by doing the fitting functions, it'll constrain the proportions, but it'll snap it to size of the frame that you've already set up. So that's that for images right here. Like I said, Kathy's going to talk a little bit about packaging up images, so making sure that all of your objects are carrying over together. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about color across the hall. So I'm going to talk about adding PMS swatches, if you're working in your brand palette or whatever those colors may be, adding specific colors to your document in the swatches palette. And then I'll also answer any other questions that people have about InDesign. So why don't we head across the hall? Does anybody have any questions right now for the whole group?
I have a simple question.
Sure.
I have a habit of putting pictures over pictures. Is the picture that I placed first still there, even though I placed another image on top of that?
It probably is. If it's within the same frame though, it'll replace it.
Okay, yeah.